Francis Adewale. Francis is here and very active in the chat, we found out, but he had oral surgery, and so he will not be speaking. And so, Francis, we wish you a full afternoon of milkshakes and ice cream. I hope you feel better. I want to start, go a little out of order. First, to remind folks that we are being recorded, and also to acknowledge that we lost 2 people from our community in the last several weeks. We lost former Chief Justice Mary Fairhurst in December, and last week we lost former Judge Don Horowitz. And when we talk about the Access to Justice Tech Justice Plan in a little while, I'll come back to Don Horowitz. But for the moment, I would just like to, because both of them were pillars in our community, I just want to take a minute of silence to just remember them. All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so the first piece of business is approval of the December minutes. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Sal. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Esperanza. Are there any changes, amendments? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes? Raise your hand. I see a majority. There's Miria, Mike. So any abstentions? Anyone against? The minutes are approved. All right, so I see that we have Judge Wesley Sanclair here. Good morning, Judge. Are you on mute?
I don't think I'm on mute.
Oh, there, now I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, welcome. So we are very happy to have you here talking about inclusive community partnerships. So take it away.
Thank you. Again, my name is Wesley Sanclair. I am a retired Superior Court judge. Spent 30 years on the bench in King County, first as a district court judge and then as a Superior Court judge. With my last duties before I retired, I was chief judge at juvenile court for around 7 years. I retired in 2019 and was recently appointed in December of 2020 to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission as chair of that commission at this point in time. And so I've got a PowerPoint prepared. I think that I forward it to folks. I'm not sure it's exactly on point, but I think it can kind of get us started in on a conversation of kind of what's happening at the commission at this point in time. Just having a person of color, realistically, as chair is something very new for that commission. There have not realistically been many people of color as either never been a chair, but certainly even as a member of the commission. It's been around since, next slide, please. Was created in 1981 when the SRA was enacted by the state legislature. And the SGC is the body that at first was an independent agency, but then has now been lost that designation. So it lost the number of staff that was associated with it. And it was really, the SRA was devised to create more uniformity and outcomes, sentencing outcomes, and to kind of take away the, actually to end up taking away discretion from judges, end up putting that discretion actually in prosecutors much more actively. And that, there's been some studies most recently done that really sees that has created some disparities of pretty significant magnitude. The SRA is currently being, next slide, please. We operate to give advice to the governor and the legislature, consult. We have 20 members. We're just in the process of a bill is in the state legislature that I testified on last week, increasing it to adding 4 additional members. Those members are someone from the Minority and Justice Commission, a behavioral health specialist, lived experience in our citizen panel, as well as tribal registration, tribal representation, since there's no one from the tribes. We have 4 non-voting members as well. Next slide, please. We've right now with the legislator in session, we are actively reviewing proposed legislation to kind of give feedback to the legislature about impact of the proposals. Legislation, as I think folks are aware of, is a process that often is new bills are based upon actions that have occurred in sets of behaviors that have occurred. Right now, there's lots of the catalytic conversion thefts that are occurring. So now there's 4 different bills pending, increasing catalytic theft from a misdemeanor or a Class C felony, actually elevating it to a Class B felony, with the legislator asking that, and it should be unranked. Well, sometimes it's not clear understanding of what unranked means in the SRA. And so part of the information that we do is to kind of give feedback on what we could, what's the actual practicality of it occurring. Next slide, please. We're also for the first time since the SRA was implemented in 1981, where there's a pretty robust review that's being conducted by the Criminal Sentencing Task Force, a task force of the legislature, chaired by John Thunheim and Representative Goodman. And the idea is to that committee has been tasked to, our task force has been tasked to make recommendations that help with deal with complexity, to simplify the SRA, also to really start dealing with the impact of racial disparities that are clearly present. So we've had this in place for around 40 years, and this is the first time that we've actually taken a hard look at it. I now sit on that task force as well, and it's really a bipartisan task force with judges, prosecutors, folks from both sides of the aisle, and I think it's going to be it is a challenging conversation because there's the polarization that we see in the legislate politically is also present in that task force. We've got a couple. We have some active requests from that task force to the commission, which looking at the unranked offenses. There's over 300 of them, and we're proposing that they be eliminated based upon the fact that since they've been implemented, and sometimes over 20 years ago, there have been no convictions as a result of it. So why do we have these laws that are not being utilized whatsoever? Next slide, please. As we know, as you may realize, the task force, the SRA is really as a retributive type of sentencing model. It's intended to have an element of deterrence associated with, but in fact, it really is more punishment. Just desserts is the model. And one of the questions I continue to ask is, when these sentences were formulated with a small group of prosecutors deciding what the sentences were, what was the science behind any of the, whether they effectively addressed issues of recidivism? There was no science, actually. And to this day, there remains little science in determining what an appropriate sentence is. And my comment consistently is we are as a system regarding accountability, we have a strong addiction to a sense of punishment and equal incarceration, and the longer the incarceration, the better. When actually the science tells us that that doesn't have the outcome that we really desire, doesn't affect recidivism, and actually marginalizes folks for longer periods of time. Next slide, please. We're as we indicated, we make our public hearings available to the public, obviously, and I really have an open door policy to make sure that folks who Friends of the Incarcerated is a group that they have a space. They're welcome to engage in conversations when we in the course of our hearing. So it's, we try to make ourselves much more open. We're trying to actually utilize some of the current science that tells us, adolescent brain science tells us that, the human brain, the last portion of the body to mature from a lobe, doesn't really mature until the ages of 24 to 29. My wife says it's much older than that, since she's waiting for me to reach a level of maturity. But and we're holding people responsible, criminally responsible, for behaviors that oftentimes their brains are really not mature. Sometimes we have this conversation that says to our young people, "What in the heck were you thinking?" And then the reality, our response is, "Oh yeah, that's right, you weren't thinking." And so I'm I utilize restorative principles, restorative justice in the course of my tenure at juvenile court. And it's part of a continuing conversation at the commission about how do we become more restorative to so that people can engage and be a part of the community, because just about everyone gets out of jail eventually.
Just ripped off the crispy edges and put them in my soup.
I think somebody needs to, yeah. Thanks. So Judge
So,
Sanclair,
Yes, please.
in the last few minutes of your talk, did you want to take questions, or did you want?
I'm glad to take questions, Mr. Price. Absolutely.
Are there questions for the judge, or points that you wanted to make specifically around inclusive community partnerships? Something that we may not have heard yet.
Yes, Ms. Moore.
Yeah,
Pardon my pronunciation.
Thank you so much, Judge Sanclair. I heard you speak at the Racial Justice Consortium, I think it was last month or recently anyway. And I was moved by the comments and the statements you were making regarding the necessity for voices of those with the lived experience in the work that we all do, and how that is important in framing our work and decisions that we make, and that we can't, we should not be making them in a vacuum without the input of community voices. So if you could share a little bit about that, that was very powerful in my opinion.
Well, certainly it's, based upon the legislative process that has already been initiated. It's our intent to formalize that those voices are at the table. As I say, my outreach is really to make sure that the community-based organizations who are engaged in support of the incarcerated or formerly incarcerated are a space is created at that table for them, meaning the commission's table. And it's as well as, since we have the Department of Corrections at the table, that I try to use my role as chair to make sure that they are being inclusive and seek, because sometimes people who engage in this work on a regular basis view themselves as being the experts. And the reality is they may be experts on systems, but they're not experts on what needs to be done to help people move from point A, oftentimes to point, not just B, but C and D and E, to move themselves forward. And so part of it is hearing that and insistence that occur is part of it. The other thing that is occurring at this point in time is that we're actually, there's a funding bill that is looking to provide stipends to folks who, many community members are not being paid independently, but and so that there's a mechanism to, once you have someone sitting on your commissioner board, that you then can offer some monetary support stipends for that person.
So I see, so why don't we stop the screen sharing? I see a question from Sal Mangia and then I see a question in the chat from Francis Adewale. So those will be our last questions.
Judge, thank
So
you.
Sal.
I have a comment and a couple of questions. My comment, at least just someone, I am not involved with the criminal justice system. I'm a civil trial attorney. But my perception is that the criminal penalties are excessive and they're just, they don't do any good. They just use up a lot of valuable resources when you have a community of limited resources. And I understand that's one goal of your commission, is to looking at the sentencing guidelines. With that in mind, two questions. One, do you actually have people who have been formerly incarcerated serving on the commission who have a voice about what I would term excessive sentences? And then my second part is, and I'm just going to start asking this to everybody because during our working session, is there a way that you see the Access to Justice Board being able to help your mission so that we can work together? We serve some of the same people in different arenas, but just wondering, and if you don't have an answer now, I would invite you to think about that and let us know in the future.
Thank you very much. We don't have anyone serving as of yet, but certainly with this new legislation, it should give us the ability to get someone appointed to that. And I need to actually cogitate on the how we can align ourselves, because our clients oftentimes are the same families. It's certainly the same communities. And I think we have to be more intentional. It can't be just, and the reason I don't want to respond to it, because it feels like it's, for me, it would not be very thoughtfully done. And I really want to take it back to the commission, to I've got a kitchen cabinet of folk that I kind of bounce things off as we try to move the principles of what does an effective criminal legal processing system look like versus the one that we have that is really very punitive based, and the punishment oftentimes is generational in nature. And there's two questions in the chat, which, how do you include community participation in policy making by the commission? One is giving them a place to express themselves as just as members of the public, and understanding that I even have attended their meetings at various points in time, so that I have, it's kind of my own personal outreach that I started as a chief judge in King County, and I think that's the more effective way to do it. Then the next question is, how do you respond to concerns of organization? Well, the challenge always is, how do you define community? Because community is a very broad spectrum of activities, and I think the key is just make sure that you're getting a variety of voices, whether it be Freedom Project or Friends of the Incarcerated, Family of the Incarcerated, our reentry programs that are out there. And fortunately, I've had lots of opportunities sitting on the criminal sentencing task force with the state legislature that's put me in contact with them, so I know more of them than I would have known otherwise. And then I'm involved in community groups like Community Passageways in King County, or Choose 180, which are dealing with young people. And so those become kind of my entree to getting a wide source of input with regard to community voices.
Well, thank you, Judge. We are out of time, but we very much appreciate your bringing these issues to us, and we will be interested, as you, to use your word, cogitate in ways that we can work with you and the ATJ board. So thank you again for being here today.
And thank you for the opportunity, and please be safe out there.
Thank you.
Right now.
Thank you. All right. So although I am next on the agenda, I'm actually going to swap with Antonio Janata, because you have other places you have to be. So good morning.
Good morning, and thanks. But definitely an interesting conversation. I'm glad I was able to listen to Judge Sanclair. Hi, everybody. I'm Antonio. I'm the policy director at Columbia Legal Services. My job today is to talk very briefly about legislative session. It's sort of a big picture about where we are, where we're at in session. There's, knowing a lot of folks on this call, everybody's got a certain bills that may be more interesting than others. I think I'm just going to go and to the 30,000 foot level and just frame a couple of issues, and then maybe we can talk about specific bills if folks have questions. But anyways, today is the 4 C's. I want to talk about COVID. I want to talk about the calendar. I want to talk about the cleanups, and I want to talk about the conflicts. And I'll try to explain all 4 points just to help me think through what I'm talking about. So first of all, the impact of COVID on the legislature is well known. We are back to a virtual session. I remember very strongly how I think appropriately proud Senator Billig was last year when we closed the legislative session and saying that there were no work-related transmissions of COVID on the Senate floor. Last year, and now how things have changed. Obviously, the sad loss of Senator Erickson, and during the interim, and then with the start of session, immediately 5 senators tested positive for COVID, including Senator Billig. So it's a different environment. The decision to go virtual seems to have been pretty smart considering. It's impacting a little bit of obviously the conversations around legislation. I mean, and for example, emergency powers. This is such a strange situation to have such a long running emergency, and whether the legislature needs to look at gaining more control over their ability to start and stop emergencies declared by the governor. And the legislature actually has the authority under the Constitution to call itself into a special session to address emergencies, but they've never used that power in their history. So they actually are working on some legislation right now to make the rules clearer as to how the legislature can call itself into session. Now, they need 2/3 vote to get there to call themselves in. So in this very partisan environment, getting 2/3 vote is difficult, not impossible, as you'll see in a bit. Okay. Let's talk about the calendar. We are in day 12 of a 60-day session. We're 1/5 of the way through. Cutoffs are coming. So February 3rd, if you have a new policy bill that's just been introduced and you want to make sure that it is continuing to move, you need to have it heard and out of committee by February 3rd. And then you need to turn it right around and have it heard and moved out of the fiscal committee by Monday, February 7th. So it is, it's time. There are bills getting exec right now. We only have 2 more weeks, actually not even full weeks of actual ability to hear a bill. At the same time, those committees are trying to vote their bills out of committee, so there's not a lot of slots left open. So if you don't see your bill on a calendar to be heard by next week, those 4th week hearings slots are 1, difficult to find, and 2, difficult to survive the double cutoffs of policy and fiscal. So that's the reality of this sprint of a session that we're in. After that, then after the February 7th fiscal cutoff, you have about a week of 8 days of floor session, and all bills have to be out of their house of origin by 5 p.m. on the 15th. All right, so that's the calendar. Now cleanup. What are we seeing at the beginning of session is a lot of talk of cleaning up some issues that needed to get may needed to get cleaned up, fixed from bills that passed in the last year or 2. So you're seeing a lot of conversations around fixing policing bills. You're actually just yesterday, the House voted on 2 bills related to their long-term services and supports trust act, the Washington CARES Act. One bill would, and that bill, I'm talking about 2/3 vote, got 91 votes in favor to delay implementation of the CARES Act by 18 months. And the other bill actually clarified who could opt out of those programs of paying into the fund. One of the reasons we piped in during this conversation because of issues related to non-immigrant farm workers here on a work visa, on H-2A visas. We were actually trying to push for an opt-in, but the legislature didn't want to go into an opt-in situation. So they have created an opt-out for farm workers on H-2A visas. So that's both those bills passed out of the House, and they're getting fast-tracked through the Senate. So they should be out of the Senate maybe by next week. So yeah, those are the things that I'm seeing in terms of cleanups. And then the conflicts. When I was talking to people about what I expected about this session, I expected it to be a little bit more incremental. And the reason why I said that is politics are on the mind of every legislator out there. The looming elections, the tenuous majority, that's definitely shaping how people are deciding how to move forward, and what bills to take on and what bills to avoid. At CLS, we engage in some bills more controversial than others, but in the criminal legal system, those issues are already super controversial and campaign fodder. And so some bills we're seeing related to criminal legal system reform aren't even getting hearings. We've seen talk about gas tax, transportation packages being avoided because obviously that's politics as well. But at the same time, and seeing a lot more, in my experience, a lot more bills sponsored by the minority party that are getting hearings and getting exec'd out in the first couple of weeks already. So in some ways, some good bipartisan bills that it'd be nice to see more of that as well. But I think that's all being shaped by folks in swingy districts who want to make sure that they are reaching out to as broad as number of folks as possible. Politics is part of this, so it's just important to flag it. But while I thought that it would be a little bit incremental, I think due to the availability of federal money, there's a lot more talk about bigger issues to take on. There's interesting proposals. There's the zoning middle housing conversation that's happening that's really big and exciting. There's a bill that creates the Washington's Future Fund, which is like a baby bond. So if you were born, if you're a low-income child born in Washington, they put a little bit of money away, and that, I think it's $3,000, $3,200. And then when you're an adult, you can use that to help put down for a down payment for a house or to pay for college, start a business. That's kind of exciting. And then, as I mentioned in the chat, issues like providing a stipend for underrepresented communities is really an interesting bill. It's an Attorney General's request bill, and it's sponsored by Claire Wilson. I see that as a really important step to get good voice, to get the right people to these boards and commissions so that they can actually participate, and those commissions can actually be shaped by input from people who are directly impacted. So I'd love to see that one across. So even though it is a political year and you can't avoid it, and there are some exciting things afoot. So we, just so long as they don't involve the criminal legal system, but it's there's some interesting stuff out there. So those are the four things I wanted to flag. Jim, obviously you've been working on this stuff much longer than me. You have any thoughts, any bills you want to highlight?
Yeah, and I don't know, honestly, Antonio, I do not know what you have talked about because I was on an emergency call with my colleagues at OPD. But if it's helpful, there are a number of bills that that really have some promise for us. Of course, there's Senator Dingra's Omnibus Blake response bill. That's Senate Bill 5663. There's some really good parts of it. as it currently reads, affirms the absolute right to counsel for people seeking vacation of criminal convictions, certain people seeking vacation of criminal convictions. Good language, creating a unified LFO payment mechanism. We're working with Rep. Simmons and OPD to expressly call out the need for civil legal representation in this space. I know that we're also working with Rep. Simmons on budget provisos for the same. OPD and OCLA believe there is a continuum of legal needs here, from the appointed counsel right, constitutional right to counsel, through discretionary criminal defense counsel into the civil legal aid spectrum. And we are working really hard to send the message of cross-silo coordinated continuum of legal aid in the Blake context. There are mirror bills implementing a new provision in the governor's budget. The governor proposes to take $125 million out of the marijuana account and dedicate it to a community reinvestment fund. And the community reinvestment fund is really focused on unwinding and undoing harm to BIPOC and other communities that have been the victims of the war on drugs and economic and other disproportionate systems, practices, and laws. There are two provisions in the bills. The bills are 1827 and 5706 that specifically call out the need for post-conviction relief, civil and criminal post-conviction relief, as well as civil and criminal assistance in the reentry context. And we're working with the governor's office. OPD and OCLA are working jointly with the governor's office. And we both testified earlier this week in support of the policy objectives and our common commitment to working with them to implement. There's no specific dollar amount yet, but we are in conversations with the governor's office on what they are intending to propose. There are 4 areas of area of focus. It is intended to be deeply connected to communities of color and community-based organizations, trusted organizations, social, economic, and otherwise. There's also a new bill, Senate Bill 5772. I don't know if you talked about this, Antonio. Nope. It's essentially concerning post-conviction access to counsel. And I honestly have yet to read the bill. It's scheduled for public hearing next week. We will be reviewing it. It may be something that the community wants to take a hard look at and decide whether it's a policy bill that they are interested in. Quite frankly, the more we can make sure that people who are convicted and who are seeking relief, post-conviction relief in any judicial forum have adequate access to counsel or even a right to counsel. And so that's something that the new leadership at OPD and we are working very closely on as well. That's a Senator Saldana bill. Other than that, it's just working our budget requests for right to counsel and for eviction defense services and a minor small amount for our child rep program.
Thanks, Jim. Any questions, folks?
So Esperanza, I see your hand up, but is that left over from before? Yeah. Questions for Antonio and Jim? Francis. Are you going to put that in the chat?
It looks like Francis has a
See chat.
question for Will in the chat.
Yes. So one question will come back to Will for your report. one question or one comment, Antonio. So it seems like our next meeting, which will be February 11th, pursuant to your time frame, what's dead in policy committee will be really dead by then. What died in approps will also be dead by then, and the remaining you'll be able to focus us in on what's still alive on the floor. Is that
Absolutely. Yep. We'll be right in the meat of floor time.
And what's the cutoff for floor action? The
15th.
15th. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you both. Thank you for your presentations, and thank you for all of your hard work.
Thanks, Jerry.
All right. So the next on the agenda is the ATJ Tech Justice Plan. So I want to first start off by reading just something really quickly that Francis wrote about Don Horowitz, because he was, as Francis said, the forefather of the Access to Justice Tech Principles, leading a group of dedicated volunteers to breathe life into the ATJ Technology Bill of Rights, which has evolved to the most recent version of the ATJ Tech Principles. So, so thank you, Don Horowitz. I never got the chance to work with you on the Access to Justice Tech Principles, but I know that you were a prime mover in that. And so, as you may know, the Access to Justice Board approved the technology principles a year ago, and the Supreme Court has adopted them and posted them on its website. Now's the work of fleshing them out, and that is what the Access to Justice Tech Plan is about. It is about fleshing out these principles and making them more concrete, giving more specific examples of barriers, more specific examples of what our vision is, more specific aspirational goals of how to resolve the technological issues that litigants have. Our technology is going to become too sophisticated for represented or unrepresented parties, frankly. And this is an issue that is being addressed, concerned about all over the country. Courts are concerned that their technology and their e-filing systems are going to be too complicated for people to be able to get into the courthouse. And in our presentation to the Board of Governors last week, we said, can't even get justice if you can't even get access. So that is the background on the Access to Justice Tech Justice Plan. We have vetted it with stakeholders. We thank you. I see Michael Terasaki. Thank you for your response. Thank you to QLaw and Denise Diskin for your substantive responses, and we made changes to it based on the input we got from stakeholders. So unless there are questions about it, would someone make a motion to adopt the Tech Justice Plan?
I move to adopt the Tech Justice Plan.
Thank you, Sal. Second.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Lindy. Any comments? Sal.
And Terry, I just want to second. I mean, Don Horowitz, this is actually his basic idea years ago. I remember him coming up to me and saying, you know, we need this, and you don't know the effect of technology, and he was the driving force, and he was such a pillar of the ATJ community. We will miss him. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Sal. Jim.
The name escapes me, but the partnership between Don and the then director of King County Law Library, I can see her face, but her name escapes me. And if anybody remembers, that would be great.
Is it Jean Holcomb?
It was Jean Holcomb. And actually, Don, in every speech he ever made on the Tech Bill of Rights, which are now called the Tech Principles, he basically said the germ of the idea came from Jean. he gave her full credit for the germ of the idea. And thankfully, Don had the resources, the passion, and the energy to move this forward. Unfortunately, it's become all too clear that in so many contexts, the principles have been adhered to or implemented in the breach, not been complied with. At the same time, there is an emerging social consensus, and certainly consensus embedding itself into state law regarding technology access, that one could say could find its origins in what we did and what the Supreme Court did with the original tech principles.
Thank you, Jim, for that. And I will just add, when I was working on getting the tech principles approved by the Judicial Information Systems Committee, I was reminded that the original Technology Bill of Rights in 2006, one of the driving forces for Don in updating them to the tech principles was that they were originally done before there was ever a smartphone. And so bringing them, I mean, in 14 years, how far how far technology had gone. As Francis says, his contacts with the tech community are legendary. We owe him a debt of gratitude. He once brought in a gentleman called the father of the internet to talk to the tech committee. So, all right.
Hey Terry, somebody should let the folks know, Mike Crandall and the folks know at the high school that Don has passed.
Oh, I'm married into the information school at the UW.
Okay, thanks.
They know. So, all right. Unless there's other comments, all in favor of approving the Tech Justice Plan, raise your hand. Okay, I also see Mike and Michelle and Francis. Thank you. Anyone against? Anyone abstaining? Thank you very much. That passes. All right, I see Will.
Yeah, hi
Good
everybody,
morning.
nice to see you. I don't have a super extensive update. I think to Francis's question in the chat, no, the EJC is not planning on lobby days during this session because the EJC traditionally is not super active during the supplemental session. As everybody here knows, our focus is primarily on the budget session, the odd year sessions. So, you know, in our stakeholder processes over the past year, we talked about what, if anything, would be on the agenda to try to advocate for in the supplemental session. And, you know, and obviously talking to Jim quite a bit about OCLA's plans for budget requests. You know, the OCLA budget requests directly submitted to the governors were more administrative. There was a sort of late breaking injection of $2 million for the pre-eviction and eviction prevention services. The EJC stakeholders are generally supportive of that request. And we're sort of working with some of the programs that are more directly affected, Michael and the Pro Bono Council, some of the Pro Bono programs on, you know, what support we can provide as they pursue that request. But as is typical for a supplemental session, the EJC is being a little bit more quiet and behind the scenes than we would usually be in a biennial session. So I don't have much beyond what Jim already said about some of the issues that are funding issues that are on the horizon there from the EJC's perspective. If anybody is interested in a little bit more details about the support for the pre-eviction and eviction prevention requests that some of the Pro Bono Council programs are supportive of, and, you know, hopeful that if it was approved that the funding would allow them to continue or expand on the eviction prevention services outside of Red Council that they're already working on, please let me know, and we'd be happy to talk in more detail. The only other EJC thing that I wanted to maybe flag for the board was, you might recall that last summer, a group of programs that provide services in King County, coordinated with the EJC on some advocacy for the county to allocate some of its ARPA funding for COVID response legal services in King County. We were successful. We got $2 million from the King County Council that is just now being rolled out through LFW. And I think Caitlin's going to talk a little bit more about that in her report. But there has been a bit of a sticking point with the county not necessarily approving immigration defense services with that funding, despite that being a huge need in the county. We think one of the main reasons why the county council approved this funding in the first place. I realize this is a statewide group and not necessarily as focused on King County issues, but could get to the point where we could use a little bit of support from the ATJ community in putting a little bit of pressure on the county, because we think immigration services are sort of fundamental to the reason that this money was approved in the first place. So we're doing what we can to get them to see the light there. So if anybody has questions about that, feel free to contact me as well. And yeah, otherwise, I think that's our report. I think our new chair, Kara Masters, was on the call, so I don't know if she had anything to add. I don't know if she's still here.
She is on the call.
I am on the call, and I don't have anything to add.
All right, thanks, Kara. We're super excited that Kara's the chair as of this month of the EJC.
Indeed.
Excellent. Questions for Will and or Kara? I see a question from Francis. ATJ priorities encourage us to emphasize local funding for civil legal aid. Can we do more?
This is about King County and in other counties.
Oh,
Yeah,
in other counties.
Yeah, Francis, I can get in touch with you directly about that. I do think there's a little more that could be done, and also using the example of the advocacy that we've done in King County over ARPA funding, but also just sort of generally about the King County budget and applying it to other counties. So let's definitely talk more.
And I also want to draw people's attention in the chat to Emily's comment that legal aid providers serving King County can apply, and she put the link there. Thank you, Emily. All right. Thank you, Will. All right, next are the funding reports. I do not see Cesar, and it says no state report. So then Caitlin, you are next.
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. If I haven't had a chance to wish you that already. The end of the year and the beginning of the new year are exciting times at the Legal Foundation. We're still tallying up the results of our year-end fundraising and hope to have a final number to share with you at the next meeting. But we had a couple of happy surprises at the end of the year, most notably an unexpected gift of $1 million to support our race equity grant program over the next 3 years, which basically, started with a small amount of money, and this gift will allow us to nearly quadruple it. So we're looking forward to meeting with our advisory panel about what their goals and how they would like to structure the expanded program, not just this year, but in years to come. And speaking of that, we have a couple of openings for community advisory panelists who might like to participate. So if you are interested in learning more about that, contact Emily Van Uga, who's on this call also. As Will and Emily mentioned, we will be administering $2 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds over the next year for COVID-related needs. These funds will be contracting with King County to make the funds available. And applications, we have a short turnaround time because the funds have to be spent this year. But the application deadline is January 30th. So coming right up. And finally, as you probably know by now, or I hope you know by now, our annual Charles A. Goldmark Distinguished Service Award Luncheon is Friday, February 11th. Dr. Ben Danielson is our keynote speaker. I think many of you at this meeting are familiar with Dr. Danielson. And of course, Annie Lee, formerly with Team Child, will be receiving the Distinguished Service Award in recognition of all that she's done on behalf of Team Child, but more importantly, on behalf of youth in our state. So if you'd like to join us, like I said, Friday, February 11th at, I think the doors open at 11:30, and you can register for that at legalfoundation.org. So that's all I've got. Thanks, Terry.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm sure, well, I certainly have a question. Others may have it too. Was your $1 million a private donor who just showed up?
And a donor who prefers to be anonymous, but we're incredibly grateful to that in their belief that this work is important. And so it's exciting news for us.
Oh, major exciting news. Yes. I see in the chat, there's already the annual Francis Sal competition to see who can raise more money. And Jim says, congratulations, LFW. Any questions for Caitlin? All right. I don't see Natalia.
No, Natalia couldn't join us, so I gave a little bit of her report
as well. All right. Okay. Then the last little bit is other updates and announcements. So our next Access to Justice Board meeting is also February 11th, so that you can spend your time with us and then go to the Goldmark lunch. Would we were able to do that in person, I know we will all relish that day when we can. Other announcements or updates that people have? I don't see any. I will just reiterate what's on the bottom of the agenda, which is that the Delivery Systems Committee is the fourth Monday. The next meeting is January 24th next week. The Tech Committee is the third Tuesday of every other month. That next meeting is February 15th. And the Rules Committee is third Tuesday every other month. That next meeting is March 15th. So, all right. Well, thank you all. As oh, and Michael Terasaki is the new co-chair of DISCO. Yes. Thank you, Francis. And congratulations, Michael. All right. Thank you all for Francis. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, as always, to Bonnie and Diana for all that you do to keep us moving along. So, all right. Oh, wow, that's another half hour back in your day. We will see you later.